Support this podcast at patreon.com/Kris Karl Photography Podcast. Most important thing for me with these podcasts is to make sure that people find new work that they're going to enjoy. I think it's important for all photographers to be expanding their repertoire of influences and just learning as much as possible and to look at as much photography as possible rather than limit themselves to just a few options. So let's start off with how you define yourself as a photographer.
How I define myself as a photographer, I would say I'm somebody that ventures forth, kind of places myself in a location with an intentionality to take pictures there. And then I just I poke around sometimes, not legally, with my camera. And I try to view the picture frame as it's like its own, the confines of that, of the frame that's my space to arrange things in. And I think that's the type of photographer I am, is somebody that really enjoys composition, with color, with elements, and with light. And I do all of that on film, especially medium format.
Do you find yourself being confined to a particular genre, or do you like to kind of do lots of crossing over?
I would say that I'm pushing myself to cross over. I would really like to become much more comfortable taking street portraits. That really, really interests me because it involves forming a connection with other people, which I enjoy doing. And to do that with then the camera coming into play as well, like that really interests me. I think that if I was to fall into a category, maybe it would just be the Americana and architecture and street scenes, which is a fairly vast, definition, I suppose. But I like to surprise myself when I make a composition that, and I look at it and I think, oh, it doesn't look like anything I've shot before. That was a little abstract. So, I just, whatever I find, I'll try. It's really just about whatever I find, not trying to stick to any one style,
In terms of composition, what do you prioritize when you're first finding a scene? How do you know when you found the scene? Are you looking at color first or repetition? Do you have a particular subject that you go out on a specific day to photograph, or do you just go out camera in hand and just see what grabs your attention?
I like that question. I mean, if I were to narrow it down, I suppose probably the latter. But usually it's that I've had an inspiration or an idea about a location. And that will be kind of the grounding point for like maybe the beginning of an expedition. And if you will, like the other day, it was just on the south side of town, kind of a bad part of town, but I knew that there was an abandoned bus depot. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start there and see what I find. And I don't think I even took one picture of the bus depot. I ended up off across the street in some like abandoned car lot. But, I think that probably the thing that I'm first looking for is light, like quality of light, texture and color. The use of light probably grounds the whole composition. And I won't be much interested in creating something in a scene if the light doesn't really appeal to me, either through the shape of the light or, like I said, the color or the texture of it.
Something I love about your work is the images of classic cars. I feel like that's something you must specifically go out with, like a designated idea that you're going to go and find these cars. Or is it just literally that it's happenstance that you have your camera and you just come across the cars in your daily movement?
So thank you, first of all. And I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because I have to confess that I spend a lot more energy than I probably should restraining myself from shooting just cars all the time, because I really, really love taking pictures of cars. Because I love cars outside of photography. One of my hobbies is motorsports, but the cars just, I love capturing the character of them and then also the details. But yes, to answer your question, that is one thing that I will be very intentional about, because I'll be sort of like scouting at all times Maybe I'm driving home from work and I see some 1967 Camaro or something on a side street. And it's just like, okay, now I know where that car lives. I'll be back, and I'll come back at golden hour, bring whatever I need for that particular shot and, kind of stake it out and make I'll make a study of it. So in cars, you kind of got me there. That is one area I'm very, very intentional about. And I do love finding new cars and capturing them.
You mentioned restraining yourself. Why do you feel the need to restrain yourself? Why is it something you don't want to do too much of?
Now that you say that, I don't know really, but I think probably because it's a bit of a trope, and I don't necessarily mind that because if you get right down to it, just about everything is a cliche. Right? I mean, everything's been done. Everybody's taken a picture of something before, and it's just about finding your way and on that particular day. And there's all that. I think it's because as an artist, as a photographer, I'm trying to find new ways to say something more emotional with my work. To convey something that really feels. And as much as I love cars as an object and as a subject matter, I don't know if that's the place where I'm going to find, that next dimension of photography for myself, But that being said, I mean, I shot 2 rolls of Portrait 400 on, what was it, Saturday, on 5 different cars that I came across in a part of town I hadn't been before.
I mean, one of the things I'm trying to do, I wrote my notes out earlier today, and I feel like there's a really interesting crossover from subject to just your general preference in terms of aesthetics. And I'm trying to find the right place because there's so many different ways that I could link this across, because I think it's going to end up being almost a triangle of subjects. But you obviously like photographing cars that look like they have history. You don't photograph new cars. You photograph cars that are classic, whether that be in everybody's eyes that they're classic, they're older cars. A lot of your architectural work is about showing the age of the building and the design period that we're not currently in. Do you dislike modern world aesthetic, generally speaking?
Short answer, yes. Yes, especially with automobiles. I think, if you don't mind me being long-winded.
Please do.
I was enjoying very much your episode with Kyle McDougall. He's a photographer I really admire and appreciate a lot. And I will say I'm a little bit flattered to be on the same podcast that he was on. But anyway, enough of that. But you all were getting into it about is it really necessary for us to evolve? Do we really need to be constantly taking these next steps with technology? And I do feel that way about vehicles, about buildings, about design in general. That I don't know if the direction a lot of these things go in is beneficial or is intentional enough. And I disregard it. I see a late model car and I'm like, no, I don't think that is progress. I think that's progress for progress's sake. And I don't see that having the lasting impact that a car from, maybe a 3 Series BMW from 20 years ago, which is timeless design, has today. Probably more so with vehicles than with buildings, but absolutely with buildings as well. So I think that's a very accurate read that you've gotten there. So
I find, generally speaking, that the more and more we, to coin your word, the more and more we evolve, we move more and more away from art in favor of function. And the problem is that function is always going to be quite minimalist and it's always going to be incredibly boring. The part about old-fashioned American cars is the fact that most of what you were looking at wasn't necessary, but damn, was it cool. It looked amazing. It made the person driving it feel amazing. It made people turn their heads and look. And I think architecture was very similar. The more and more we evolve, the more and more we're going to end up just in cars that look like crash test dummy ideals and buildings that are just blocks. There's not much art left in all of it.
No, I would have to say I really agree with that, and that's It's well put, and I think that's it. Like it's really probably the core of it is that this overvaluing of the practical, or it's the art, it's the devaluing of the tangible and the artistic, and like you said with the American car, it's like, yeah, I mean, none of that is necessary. I mean, the amount of sheet metal that like encases that thing. I mean, you take the body off, and there's nothing much there, but that's an intangible thing, right? And it's just interesting to me that we seem to have moved beyond that. And I'm wondering, I wonder like why? Like when did who agreed to this? Why are we at this point?
Yeah. I think it's almost like there feels like there's an academic influence where we are just refining and refining and refining and refining. And the people that are coming out of design colleges and universities are just people that are being taught how to get the absolute most function with the least design effort possible.
Yep.
Not to make things depressing.
No, not at all. I think, probably though it comes around to us, maybe we're not asking for it. We're not demanding these things anymore. Maybe, as consumers, we've gotten complacent. Because, or just that, I mean, not to get really depressing, but maybe like as a species or as a society, we've lost touch of something. Maybe not everybody has to give as much of a damn about cars as I do. And you notice I'm making this a bit of a theme, but I do really like cars. But I look at somebody driving something, and I'm like, why did you buy that? And I'm like, I'm not judging you. I'm just like, that is a piece of crap. Like that looks terrible. And why did somebody make that? And objectively, there's no art in that. And anyway, happily, I think maybe not to draw it back too quickly to film or anything, but I think I'm seeing a resurgence in that. I think that film photography, I think vinyl records, hobby of mine, are having major resurgences as like this like reaction, this like almost violent reaction, like to return to something that like had more form and had more feel to it. There's like this craving for that.
Well, we've had so much progress with technology in the space of 100 years, which really is a thimble in the ocean in terms of time, that we seem to think that anything that's more than 5 years old is completely worthless. And to go back to a medium that was being used 20 years ago is just complete regression. When in actual fact, I think I talked to Karl McDougall about this on the podcast you're mentioning, but I've definitely talked about it with someone, in that it's not a case of something being better than something else. It's just the process and the result are different, and it will suit different personalities in different ways. And I think a lot of people are finding film currently for an incredible amount of variables. There's the problem with digital camera manufacturers bringing out new models within months of each other, which makes people feel like shit for the money that they're laying out on cameras. Plus, also, I think people are growing up and they're realizing that photography is not supposed to be just instantly gratifying. Sometimes the graft and the process is what makes you sort of love it more.
Well, I would have to say I completely agree with that, and that especially that last statement. And what's funny about like many of these topics is that if to try to justify it like in some kind of argument would sound like I don't even know how I would defend it. It's like, yes, for whatever reason, I prefer the most inconvenient and expensive means of taking a photograph that I can get. And sometimes, I have to wait days to see the image I've just captured. And on paper, somebody would be like, why would you want that?
Yeah.
And I can't really, I mean, I could explain at length why I prefer that, but it is interesting. And
well, let's start off with the process. Let's not talk about the result, but let's talk about the process. What is it about the actual process of taking film photos? I guess the question would be, what does it do for you, the actual process?
I would say that it is that the process of film that is wholly responsible for my photography today. I would have to give you some history.
Yep.
The history is that I started taking pictures when I was 12 years old. I was lucky enough to go to a school that had a dark room, and I took a photography class. and I shot black and white. It was an old, I think it was a Pentax. Can't tell you which one, but I had an old Pentax, and I was using an enlarger and making black and white 8x10s, and it was just great, and I loved it. I really, really loved it, and I think I was pretty good at it at that age, and went on to get my own camera. I went to these. I grew up outside New York City, and I went to these like Nikon film seminars. I was like the youngest person there, and photography was a real thing for me, and I moved away from it, and there's a pretty big gap in my picture making history. But I would try to reconnect to photography with digital cameras, either ones that I'd bought or borrowed. And I had this sensation that like I had lost touch with photography, or that like, it just wasn't there for me anymore. Because I couldn't find myself back in that place where I would just be in the world with a camera and then just really, really focused and like very in the moment of like creating an image.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened for me is I got, and this, I'm answering the question at this point. Sorry to ramble, but I, on a whim, went to this antique store, and they had a whole shelf of film cameras. And my first thought was like, well, that's just, how the hell would I even begin to do film? I'm like, do they even make film? And, how would I develop it and all this? And I was like, well, whatever, I just bought one. And I started shooting pictures with film. And it was like, the testament I would give is that like immediately I was launched right back into that place where the creation of an image was like this almost sacred act, because what I was, all of the movements I had to make to arrange that frame to contain the things I wanted to contain in exactly the way that I wanted it to, and then to like release the shutter button and expose that image. Like that whole thing, it's like this, you're creating something that exists right away. It's like this physical thing. And like, there's almost like this responsibility I feel in that, like I'm not just going to blaze through a whole roll of film without putting quite a bit of thought and effort into it. And that's all it is for me. It's that intentionality that is demanded by film, because I'm creating something in the physical plane the minute I press that shutter button. And that's the kind of that for me, that's the piece that's needed. I don't know why that is. I probably need to examine that more, but I will say that if you put a digital camera in my hands in the same spot, I just, I'm sure I could create good images, but I just wouldn't feel the same sort of deep, like in the moment, connection to the whole process. So it's just interesting. It's like everything changed the minute I went back into film. Boom, there it is.
And then in terms of the result, what do you see a tremendous amount of difference between film images and digital images, especially considering the way that we consume most of our photography is on screens now? To you, does it make a lot of difference in terms of, let's say, the people that you're following and the people's whose work that you are inspired by? Do they have to be a film photographer for you to be inspired by them?
I really like that question. I would not say necessarily, although if you were to take an inventory of my Instagram followers, you'd probably find that the majority of them are film photographers, because it's a bit of it's a pretty nice, it's a nice community. It's very friendly, very welcoming. People kind of look out for each other a little bit in it, but I think that mostly for me, it's that the prevailing aesthetic in film, at least, and by in film, I really mean like, on Instagram, but in like the daily public film thing is, a little softer colors, softer contrast, overexposure, street scenes. And that appeals to me. I find, just in a very, very general sense, like no offense to anybody out there, but that, a lot of the digital work I see tends to have like more intense saturation, more intense contrast, a little bit more of a heavier hand in the editing. which I don't mind. I'm not opposed to editing at all. I edit all of my work, but I just noticed there's just kind of the two, in a very broad sense, like aesthetic camps. And I just personally align better with the film one. I just like that softer look, which is probably the reason I picked film to follow.
Well, there's something quite fascinating, really, with the current state of digital photography, because we've got an arms race between about 3 different companies to make cameras as idiot-proof as possible and to produce as much detail as possible. And then you've got the end result of that is a bunch of photographers, and I'm being incredibly... I'm using this in a pejorative way, so I probably shouldn't, but I am a digital photographer, so at least I'm part of the people I'm castigating. They take this item, this product that they've bought that takes the pictures for them essentially and has an incredibly high level of detail, and then they spend additional money to buy presets to make it look as much like film as possible. And there's just an incredible irony to all of that.
Yeah, that actually is one of the things that I find it's delightful to me that a technology, I mean, Portra, whatever that stock was introduced 20 something years ago, that this simple technology can create something, and then in the digital realm, there'll be all of this time and effort applied to almost like degrade their image in a way that gives it that sort of look. And it's like, well, again, I'm not knocking it, but it is interesting to me. It really brings, in my mind, us back to something you and I were talking about earlier, which is just that progress for progress sake. Why are we going and why sort of thing? Because it's like, well, we had Portra 20 years ago, so why I don't even, how many megapixels does a digital camera, what are we talking about now?
About 30 seems to be the average. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, but yeah, it's to each their own. I mean, there's definitely benefits to both. Absolutely no doubt about that. But yeah.
Well, you don't see a lot of people trying to find a way to make their film work look more digital.
You do bring up a good point there. They do not. I mean, I could. I mean, if I, in Lightroom, I could certainly. I mean, I think for me that would just be, turning up contrast, turning up saturation,
making it look like a wedding photo from 2003.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you see that what I'm talking about. I just see it in some of the digital work I follow, where the sky is very heavy and it doesn't have that light look. It's usually like a heavier, more intense look. I don't know why.
Well, to be honest with you, I am a digital shooter. I work as a photographer. I use Sony, much to my behest. I wish I wasn't, but my wife, who works with me, insisted that we move to Sony, and I spend most of my time when I'm working through the color in images, kind of fighting off color because there's so much saturation to the files that it feels almost like the raw file is like Harvey Weinstein and I'm someone looking to promote their acting career.
Yeah.
We're in a good place for this. So let's talk about film stocks. What's your go-to film stocks?
Oh, I'm so boring. It's Portra 400. I just know it really well. I need to make a jump and try out Fuji 400H just to really give it a good go. But I'm very happy with Portra 400 and 800. I use 800 too, but just works really well for me. A bit of Ektar. That's great too. I like the way that Ektar does green. I don't like green. I love green in the real world. Just as a shooter, I tend not to like it, especially with other colors involved. If it's just green alone, I'm pretty happy. But anyway, Portra 400. Okay,
so pretty loaded question here then. So why do you hate black and white?
I think you're putting words in my mouth.
Yep, 100%.
I don't hate black and white. I just love color. It's a really integral part of the arrangement of each frame is the position of color and the use of color and the presence of color. When I do shoot black and white, and I do, but notice I don't post it because it's not much good. But when I do shoot black and white, I find myself like I've lost like this major element, and I have to focus much more on like object and kind of using more like structural pieces, which is great. It's a great challenge for me. But I just find myself really missing the color. Anyway, and also that being said, I develop at home, and C41 I'm very comfortable with. I actually haven't developed black and white at home. Actually I've developed black and white in 20 years. So maybe I should do that, and then I'll start shooting some more black and white. We'll see.
Well, it's like you're reading my notes from where you are, because my next question is, why do you process your own film?
I think it's probably a personality thing. I'm just the kind of guy that I change my own oil in my car. I fix all my own stuff in my car. I like doing things myself. But because it's my art, for me, and this is just for me, this is definitely not a statement of judgment or anything, but for me, like it's very important to me that I retain ownership of it and control of it. And I just really enjoy knowing that that I'm taking care of it myself, basically. Like, this is an in-house job. And the other part of it is that I'm impatient. And, I shot 2 rolls today. Like I was saying earlier, I went to the mountains before we started the thing. I went to the mountains for the day, and I shot some rolls, and I can develop them tonight. And then tomorrow, when they're dry, I will scan them, and I've got them. And that I can't really beat that. That's much faster turnaround than any lab out there. That's a big part of it too.
So let's talk about cameras then. What are you using in the way of cameras?
My primary shooter is a Bernica ETRS. It's a medium format camera. I use a 70 millimeter lens, Zenzinon lens on there, which that focal length roughly translates to 50 millimeter on like a 35 millimeter camera. I also have a 150 lens for that. I don't use that a whole lot. But the Bernica, I use that. That's pretty much all day, every day. And then I also have a Canon A1 and a Canon AE1 program. Both of those get some use. Today I was hiking. I went and climbed a mountain out in the Shenandoah mountains here in Virginia, and I did not feel like carrying my however heavy it is, but it's pretty heavy, Bernica around my neck all day. So I had the Canon AE1 program with me. But that's really it. A friend of mine gave me a what's it called? Argus. I forget. It's an Argus. It's from like 1955. It's a brick. So I'm gonna maybe some rolls through that. We'll see. Just see how it goes.
And what do you find? Do you find yourself shooting differently when you're shooting 35mm compared to medium format?
Yes, I do. Medium format works better for my eye because you've just got that much larger exposure area, so the detail is higher. And I think that I found that when I first got into medium format, it was like I felt like, oh, this is the thing I've been looking for, because the camera sees what I see, or at least much more closely than a 35 millimeter does, and that's why medium format is my preference. My bank account doesn't like it, but it's my preference. But 35 millimeter has a place, and just switching back to the Canon AE1 program today for the first time in months. I just reminded how enjoyable it is. It's a much smaller camera. It almost felt like having a point and shoot. That I've got 36 exposures to play with. So suddenly I'm like, I'm going to take a picture of that stick. Why not? I'm not counting my dollars every time I squeeze the shutter. It's just, I just love the detail, medium format. You just can't beat that for me.
So I started off, when I started photography, which was about 7 years ago now, my friend who ran a studio had an old Canon AE1 lying around on like a display shelf. And after getting to know him well enough that I could be obnoxious enough to do it, I actually asked him if I could have it, because I wanted to learn to shoot film. And I shot about 20 rolls of film through it. did okay. I literally popped into like the most cheap place I could find that would do like 1 hour film processing, and it came back as expected for someone that's just learning on the spot. But I remember just enjoying the process of it so much that actually since the lockdown, I decided to start learning. One thing I wanted to come out of lockdown with was at least a sign of progress in myself as a person. And so the podcast has obviously taken off quite significantly in being able to talk to people around the world. But also I taught myself how to develop film. So far, only black and white film. And so far it seems to be going okay. But it also reignited my problem with when I go on eBay, I suddenly find a million things that I want to purchase. And I'm now awaiting the arrival of a Canon AE1 and a Canon A1. So I guess there's just a very interesting parallel there between us.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was actually going to ask you if you messed around much with film, and if so, with what? That's like kind of a counter question, but I think you just preempted that.
Well, I'll tell you what I've got so far in terms of this little journey that I've been on for all of a week, where I've actually taken it seriously. So a friend of mine, very good friend, this is going to sound like the biggest load of bullshit ever, but essentially a friend of mine owns a couple of Hasselblad 500 cm. So he's lent me one with 150mm lens to get to know medium format film with. And I've been shooting rolls upon rolls upon rolls of HP5 through that to kind of get used to using it as a camera, because the process is kind of crazy. And then I'll have some stuff to actually learn to develop when I get back. And I had previously photographed about 25 rolls of HP5 or Delta 3200 when I was in Nevada, photographing the desert and in Vegas and whatnot. And it's just sat for 4 years in a cupboard undeveloped. So I've used those as practice rolls, and I've actually been quite stunned at the fact that I've only botched one roll so far, and it wasn't my fault.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty good going, honestly. And, also just the joy of developing roles that have been left dormant. It's what a nice surprise, because I'm sure you have no idea what's going to be on there.
No, it's kind of like blacking out and then finding a video in your phone that tells you how what you were up to. It's basically, I found like an insight into what I was doing in 2016, which is kind of crazy.
Well, I was going to say, I was like, but probably with less incriminating things going on. But then you said it's Vegas, so now I'm not so sure.
I'm too boring to take Vegas to its limits for sure. All right, so let's just talk about Virginia for a bit. What's it like as a subject? Great question.
So I'm a bit of a evangelist for where I live. I live in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond's the capital. And I love this city. I really do. I moved here from Brooklyn 7 years ago. And I would say that, there's two answers to that question. I mean, Virginia as a subject is just pretty vast, because I really enjoy shooting landscapes, and I like rural things. I like finding weird things. I like shooting pictures of, farm equipment. And, Virginia has pretty wide expanses of all of that. So if I was to confine my photographic journey to the state of Virginia, I could probably be more than happy with a lifetime here. We've got the oceanfront, we've got the mountains, all sorts of cool rural crap in the middle. Washington, D.C. is, an hour and a half from where I live, and this is a great city. And then Richmond, which is, if you follow my work at all, is very, very prevalent in my work. Richmond is just a gold mine. I mean, a treasure trove for photography, really, because it was the capital of the Confederacy during the Civil War. So the old city, beautiful architecture. But then it fell into disrepair, and it was an industrial sort of area. And a lot of that fell into disrepair. So you got all these great old warehouses and decrepit buildings, some of which are being restored. Just a huge range of architecture. And then lots of, every block in the city is crisscrossed by an alley. So, I'll just go out and wander these alleys and just find the damnedest stuff back there, like a jet ski just sitting in somebody's backyard, just random things like that.
Oh yeah, I've seen that picture. That's an incredible shot.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was trying to work out what on earth was going on in that picture. I was like, why is there a jet ski in a field?
Yeah. yeah. You'd actually be surprised how many jet skis you find in fields if you really go looking. I could probably do like I could do a zine, yeah, literally.
Okay, so you mentioned DC. Now, back in February, I went to DC for the first time. I think it was either late January or early February. I can't remember off the top of my head now. And I wasn't expecting much, if I'm honest, because we went there for a few days. And when I say I wasn't expecting much, I'm not trying to belittle the city, but I didn't do much research into it coming in. My wife's your most standard tourist ever. She's the one that's got the map. And if you just imagine a cartoon tourist, that's my wife. She loves it. It's her favorite thing in the world. I was staggered with how much I enjoyed Washington, D.C., how much of a great place it is, and how friendly the people were. Also quite surprised, if I'm completely honest, and we are not going political on this podcast at any point ever, but I was quite surprised at how calm it was for a city in a country that never seems to stop panicking over its politics.
Yeah. No. It's I can attest because I'm up there. Well, I'm not now because of COVID-19 and all this, but I go up there a lot because I'm a museum hound, and there's great museums up there. And
absolutely,
you'd never know. Yeah, you would never know that Donald Trump. I mean, sorry, I'm not gonna. I accidentally almost was gonna say something political. We won't go political. It's a photography thing, but to your point, you would not know that all this rigmarole is going on. If you dropped me there and didn't tell me, I would just think, man, there's a huge diversity of culture here. It's very friendly. It's clean, very clean for an American city. It's friendly, great food, lots of museums. Like, what's not to like? Exactly.
It was a lot of fun as far as street photography goes. I had a couple of places I had to go to and hang out. And one was Ollie's Trolley. I wanted to go and hang out there because I love the signs. And there's a little burger place there that's really nice. And I wanted to get some pictures of tourists at the Lincoln Memorial because we went there the first day and I was amazed at how cool it was, how nice of a place it is, and what an interesting walk it is. And then I became fascinated with the conduct of some of the tourists. I mean, you get like high school kids doing their TikTok videos in front of Lincoln, and I just think, what has happened to us as a race?
Yeah. Don't even get me started. But yeah.
Let's talk about Richmond. Let's leave Trump behind and talk about Richmond. What's the attitude to you walking around with your camera like? Do you ever have any problems in your hometown photographing it?
I love that you asked that question because I think that goes hand in hand with something I alluded to earlier, which is sometimes poking myself into places maybe I shouldn't. And I'm not, going on the record and admitting trespassing. I'm not like that. But, I'm not afraid to kind of, if I see a shot, step into somebody's backyard maybe really quick or something. So I found something interesting. And this actually, despite your best effort, is going to be a political statement, but not really. When I venture outside of the city into like the immediate surrounding areas, those areas by and large are like much more conservative politically. And it is whenever I'm in those areas taking photographs that I find people, in fact, the only like defensive interactions I've had with people towards my photography has occurred in those areas. And they'll be like, "What are you doing? What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just taking photographs. I like your car." And, I'm not like on their property or anything, right? And I'm just like, do you mind if I take a photograph of it? And they're like, I'll get interrogated, and it's usually very like standoffish. So that part always amuses me. I don't begrudge them that. I mean, it's fine if I'm not welcome, I'm not welcome. But then when I'm in the city proper, which is a much more diverse and, it's a pretty laid back, liberal place. Generally, I'm really well received. It's a conversation starter, and people are. I was photographing. What was it? It was a it was a BMW M6. It's an E24. So it was like from the, late 70s, early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm shooting this car, and I'm on hands and knees, basically, like getting an angle in it. And a guy comes out of his house and just talks to me about his car for a while. It's like it wasn't like a big deal. I was just like shooting his car, and he was kind of pumped about it, to be honest. So yeah, I'd say that. And for me, I completely change when I've got a camera around my neck. I walking in the street with a camera around my neck, I just feel like very empowered, and very, very complete. And
Mm-hmm.
I love meeting people with a camera, and it's not even to take their photograph, but just to like people, they'll start a conversation because they can tell it's an old camera. They can tell it's not like a digital camera. And they'll ask me like, why are you shooting film? What's the deal? Like, why are you taking pictures with that puddle? Whatever.
Yeah.
And I just love that. I love the interactions that happen around photography.
So something that I've always been kind of interested by is the knowledge of your subject and how much that feeds into the quality of your photos. Because as someone that photographs female models, if I'm completely honest, most of the time I don't have a fucking clue what they're thinking, but every so often it seems to work out okay. When it comes to the city that you're photographing, you live there, you see it you see it, I am assuming every day or at least fairly regularly. Do your photos improve as you get to know the space better? Or is it something where you could go to, say, I don't know, you could head to LA and you might just have the best day shooting on the first day there and then struggle from then on?
I've surprised myself. I think I'm fairly versatile, and it's actually one of the things I really like about my process is like going to a new place and just being immediately challenged by like kind of finding my style in that place. But I find that like, the repetition of certain things has made me much better at them. And I think that's only because having shot them before, I know what they're going to look like. So I just kind of know what's going to work once, the roll finally, gets scanned and I get to finally see it, and I think that probably my photography with architecture has probably improved the most from that, because it's a lot harder than you would think. I think at first glance to take a really interesting picture of a building. So many times I've like, thought, man, this is going to be fire. This stuff is just going to be great. I can't wait to get it back. And then I get, scan my roll in after it's dried, and I look at it. I'm like, wow, these are really boring.
Right.
So probably just that has really informed my how I view angles and all that kind of thing.
Is there anywhere on your bucket list that you want to go and photograph? Is there like a city that you'd love to visit, or just something that you haven't yet had the chance to do that when people are actually allowed to get on planes again and go places that you'd like to head to?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot because it's almost like at this point becoming like, fantasies. The two places I'm probably most excited to go visit and I'm planning to go visit would be Tokyo or Berlin. And both of those are high on my list just culturally. I just want to go as a tourist. I'm maybe somewhere between you and your wife in terms of where I fall on that spectrum, but I really like urban photography. I like angles. I like buildings and cars and things, and so both those appeal to me as both to photograph culture, but then just to I'm sure there's just going to be like a completely endless supply of angles to photograph. But all that being said, I'm also I just absolutely love the American West. This country. It's vast and it's really weird. There's just so many layers to it. And, the few times that I've been out in like the West, like proper, like the West, it's just mind blowingly huge, and the colors, and it's just like, you just get out there and, like Zion National Park in southern Utah or whatever. And it's the Grand Canyon. And I've not gone to those places as a photographer. I've taken pictures there, but I've not gone with like, camera bag, rolls of film. And I think that I probably owe myself that. I'd really like to go out there. So probably that's probably what's coming up next once all this quarantine stuff is over.
I'm 100% on board with you on the American West. I had the opportunity to photograph Yosemite a few years ago, and if it wasn't for the fact that I was suffering from the most horrendous food poisoning, I'm sure I would have had a great time. But there is actually one place I'd really love to see you photograph, because obviously I'm a fan of your style, I'm a fan of your work, and I think there's a city that I'd really love to see what you got from it, and that's Bruges in Belgium. Now I will warn you now.
I've been there multiple times.
Have you really?
I have.
Man, I thought I was being all clever.
No. I want you to finish that thought, because the reason I've been there has absolutely nothing to do with photography.
Well, I think it's the most beautiful city in Europe that I've visited, and I've gotten about. As I probably shouldn't say, I have gotten about, and it is a place I'm madly in love with. But the reason I'd love to see you photograph it is because I feel like it would restrict you, but you have. I don't know. I feel like your preferences would restrict you, but your ability would make you create some amazing photos. And I think compositionally, it'd be very interesting to see what you did with it.
Wow. Well, yeah. If I'm going to go to Berlin, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to head over to Belgium. So, I might have to. You've almost dared me at this point.
Pretty much. I am pretty much daring you. Yeah.
So what if I can jump in the driver's seat? What stylistically do you see in work of mine that I've got like online that would say, Bruges would be a challenge here? I'm just genuinely very interested in that.
Well, I think that if you take the Americana part of what you do, that's a really hard thing to chase down in Europe, especially mainland Europe, because with such a restricted amount of space and such a growing population, nowhere's really left desolate for very long. I mean, I'm in the UK, nothing is left abandoned, everything is immediately paved over and something else is built. And I think Bruges is one of the last places that really wears its history on its, it's so proud of its history, it's so protective of its history. But I think it would take away your ability to photograph cars because there's basically none there. And I think in terms of, you photograph a lot of standalone architecture, or at least the feeling that I get from the images is that there's a lot of standalone architecture, whereas Bruges is a very conjoined city. So I think it would be fascinating to see how you recompose, considering everything seems to be interacting with everything else, as opposed to American, especially the stuff that you shoot, Americana. It's very standalone elements surrounded by a fairly decent degree of negative space.
I'd say you just about nailed it. That's challenge accepted. And that's a great answer. So thank you. And I appreciate that.
It's a good job. I've done my research, and I actually wasn't just doing a Howard Stern interview where I've read 3 lines of your Wikipedia and I think I know everything about you.
Yeah, right.
I think the one thing I do want to ask everybody on these podcasts, and I've maybe been a little bit negligent with this, but how have you used, I mean, I don't know how restricted you've been by the lockdown or by the sort of COVID situation, but how have you used this time to sort of reflect and plan your next steps, I guess, as a photographer?
I would probably, the operative word there is time. Photography, unfortunately, is not my day job. I would love for it to be, but it's not. But the landscape we're in now, I don't have to make any excuses. I don't have to push anything off. I don't have to rearrange anything. I just, when I'm done with work for the day, I have unfettered time. And, I'll just kick off at about a little after 6 and load up my bag and sometimes drive, but usually just walk. I live pretty much in the middle of the city. And, then I've got 2 hours or an hour and a half of really good light. And I think that's this has been kind of a boon time for me. My friends have actually been making fun of me that maybe try to hide how much you're thriving because, you're like, you're producing so much work and your website and all this. And so I think, I'm not without struggles on this, believe me, but I have had a lot more time to shoot, and I will say that. And then the other thing I will say is that I'm just getting really hungry to to go places, and I've just gained a really big appreciation for the freedom that I had prior to all of this to go to cities. I love cities. I grew up about 45 minutes outside of New York City. New York will always be, the place by which all others are measured. And I love it. And, I was like, God, I just want to just take the train up to New York and just spend just shoot rolls after roll of film up there, and, so it'll all come to an end soon. It's not going to last forever.
So to round off, what we always make sure we do is we give everybody an idea of where they can go and find your work and follow you on social media, see your website and so on. So would you like to give us all of your linky details?
Sure, absolutely. I would say, Instagram and my website are the places. You can also find me on Facebook, but I think Instagram's the spot. And that's chromatic_crane, chromatic crane. So CHROMATIC_CRANE. And then my website is www.cranecollection.org. And I update that really regularly. I try to make that a reflection of what's most current. Please check either of those places.
It's been such a privilege to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Kris, I really appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure. And thank you for staying up late to have a chat with This American.
The blackbird inside your chest that calls on you to cry. You decided it was time for him to fly out of the darkness and into the light, higher and higher out of sight. The whisper inside your heart tells you let go. Time to leave the past. You did what you knew. Slow down and rest. You've been through a war. No one can hurt you anymore. Behind closed eyes, memories unfold, hidden secrets, shimmering gold. Behind closed eyes, where the shadows play, there's no looking the other way. Behind closed eyes. There's a song inside your soul, waiting to be heard. Sing it aloud, you've written every word. Oh, out of the silence and into the unknown. Louder and louder, let go. Behind closed eyes, memories unfold, hidden secrets, shimmering gold. Behind closed eyes. chest that calls on you to cry. You decided it was time for him to fly.